Year 1, Day 76. The agency launches satellites to gain funds. The video was late due to me having a cough and I couldn't upload it, so... Year 1, Day 82. Another spyglass satellite is launched into polar orbit of Kerbin. Aligning itself to its azimuth, it soars into the sky. As a reminder of the Etos sounding rocket missions that preceded these, one of the control surfaces becomes stuck, and although this does not hinder the mission, it is a bit of a flashback. The Fenris is depleted of fuel, and the Bell A stage separates and fires its engine, raising the apparatus to 95 kilometers in an 82-degree orbit of Kerbin. The aerodynamic fairing is released, and RCS thrusters orient the spacecraft to its burn. The spacecraft ignites its engine. And arrives into a polar orbit successfully. With the science data attained, the retropack separates from the spacecraft. However, the retro pack fails to ignite, stranding the small return pod in orbit. The mission has failed. Spyglasses 5 and 6 failed. Spyglass 5 had a pod battery failure, and Spyglass 6 had an oxidizer leak. In an attempt to gain funding, a new satellite is launched aboard a new Bossart launch vehicle with a stretched Bell upper stage known as the Bell B1. However, seconds after liftoff, the Bell B1's second stage oxidizer tank suffers a leak. Although some sort of failure was expected due to most parts in this vessel being brand new. The Bossart, carrying Pathfinder 3, soars into the sky. It features a unique stage and a half design, wherein it contains two vernier engines, two atmospheric engines, and a vacuum engine. To gain efficiency and save weight halfway through the flight, there is a jettisonable skirt with the two atmospheric engines. This is jettisoned later in the flight. Without the low efficiency atmospheric engines, the singular vacuum engine and the two verniers increases the delta V available in the first stage and allows it to complete its mission. However, due to the oxidizer leak, orbit will not be attained to the correct specifications. The Bossart still has fuel in it, and they try to burn it so that it uses its remaining fuel to boost it just above the atmosphere. However, this fails. It's decided to try and use the RCS on the Bell, but there is no forward translation. The satellite is jettisoned, and it will burn up in the atmosphere. Spyglass 7 is launched. It is hoped that this mission will be successful, though morale is low. One of the verniers fails, And although this doesn't really prove a problem, it does mean controlling will be slightly difficult due to the asymmetric gimballing thrust. It has decided to shut down the other vernier, and although this locks out the option of roll control in upper atmospheres due to the fins not being effective, it does mean there is no asymmetric thrust, and makes piloting much easier. The Fenris boosts its payload nearly to the desired apoapsis. The Bell's engine gives a small push. Exiting the atmosphere, the payload fairing is deployed. And the Bell ignites its engine. If this mission is successful, it will be the last flight of a Bloodhound satellite, due to new and better camera systems being available. The Bell burns into a higher orbit than intended, but still usable. The Bell's engine is fired again in an attempt to compensate. The Bell's engine gives us a slight push after data is attained, so that should the retropack fail, which it doesn't, the capsule will still return to Kerbin. The pod aligns itself for re-entry. A new mission controller says the mission is as good as done. The probe loses connection, shielded by the plasma. However, that new mission controller jinxes the entire mission. Because, like Spyglass 5, battery is lost. Pathfinder 4 lifts off from the pad. A fuel line on one of the verniers begins leaking, and it suffers an explosive failure. The other vernier is shut down for the same reason as the previous Fenris launch. The Bell B-1's fuel tank has been tested previously to this flight, so therefore its reliability is drastically increased. The boss art attains the desired apoapsis. Before it cuts out. However, the satellite was launched slightly too late. Meaning it does not have the correct inclination for the required orbit. However, due to the extreme amount of fuel in the Bell's upper stage tank, it is hoped that there will be enough fuel to compensate. After all, it's only 13 degrees, right? The spacecraft plots a burn to bring its apoapsis to that of the required target orbit. However, due to the different inclinations, this proves difficult to calculate. However, it's close enough. The engine fires over the South Pole. Burns to meet the target orbit. The Bell's RCS orient the attitude required for burning, and then the engine fires. placing the spacecraft into the desired orbit, and therefore completing the contract. Pathfinder 5, a copy of Pathfinder 3, lifts off from the pad to achieve another polar orbit, although not as high as Pathfinder 4's desired orbit. It is elliptical, which mission planners think will complicate things. One of the radial engines suffers a gimbal failure on one of its two axes. Luckily, this is the pitch axis, not the yaw axis. And anyway, there's still another fully functional vernier. However, when pitching, the boss art begins to tumble, and it is decided to be very, very careful with burning. The boss art's engine cuts out. And reactivation fails. The only option left is to separate the bell. The fairing is deployed. And the satellite enters into an orbit. Like the previous Pathfinder 4 mission, it is decided to burn so that its trajectory will meet one of either the ascending node or descending node. However, unknown to planners at the time, this complicates matters because of the elliptical orbit. Pathfinder 4's bell had small spherical fuel tanks inside the payload fairing. However, due to the lower orbit, this one doesn't. Mission planners frantically try and work out a solution, and their only hope is to burn into a circular orbit and then hope the stage has enough fuel to do a massive correction burn, lowering the periapsis and then raising the apoapsis. With only 583 meters per second left and a 144 meters per second burn, the bell might just make it with a sliver of fuel. The desired orbit is achieved, and the contract is completed. Now, Spyglass 8 is launched. Morale is even lower than before. It is decided to terminate the contract should the mission fail, and move on to more advanced satellites, such as the SG-4 and 4B. The Fenris is separated. The Bell fires its engine, and the payload fairing is deployed. Mission controllers sit at their desks, hoping when the time comes, the retro pack will be successful. Like previous Spyglass missions, the Bell sets the suborbital trajectory, and the retro pack enhances it. The mission planner who jinxed Spyglass 7 is sent out the room. It is decided to arm the parachute, so that even if the pod should suffer a battery failure, the parachute's own backup systems will be able to deploy the chute. However, doing this means that the retro pack is separated, meaning the pod has no RCS thruster control during re-entry. Nevertheless, the pod makes it through. And the parachute partially deploys, and then fully deploys, lowering the speed over the surface to just 5 meters per second. A safe touchdown speed. The pod suffers a power leak. However, luckily this is of reserve power. A new idea made to combat the battery failures of past pods.